Hello crafty friends, I'm Lean from Studio Kato and I'm so happy to be back with yet another Halloween video. I have two card ideas to share with you guys today, featuring a pocket full of happiness, and these were so fun to make, and I used pretty much the same design element or card design feature in both of these cards, so I thought I'd pair them together, even though I was planning on making separate videos for these, but they're pretty quick to make anyway. So yeah, some simple cards but a fun design element combining the two, which is Spotlight ink blending. I've talked about this before, but it's such a useful background tool. So yeah, let's get into the cards. For the first card, I am using the new Mushrooms die set from A Pocket Full of Happiness, and you can see there are two main layers to each mushroom. You have just the first layer, which I cut out of white, but you can cut this out of colored cardstock as well. And then you have the second layer, which has more detail to it. So yeah, you can see there's a sort of opening at the bottom that will be where the stem goes as well. And then some have dots. This one has stripes in it, which is so fun. So I cut that out of two different shades of orange and I alternated the stripes. So there's tons of fun you can have with these. There's actually a fifth mushroom design in this that I didn't use for this card, but it also has some stripes and a fun little fringe at the bottom, which would be really cute as well. The stems also have a couple of details. You have that little fringe on the stem, and then there are also these highlights for the mushrooms as well. So I cut those out of white too, and I'm using my jewel picker to adhere those on. This is just a really handy tool. I mostly use it for embellishments, but it works so great for small die cuts. You've probably seen me use this all the time, and this one happens to be from Studio Light because I needed a new one. And this one was the only one still available at my local craft store, but any embellishment one works well. Now let's get into the ink blending. I'm using Concord and 9th inks on watercolor cardstock because that just works really well for ink blending, but you can use any cardstock that you have, any white cardstock you have. I am using blending brushes because those work really well for me, but you could use those old Ranger blending tools as well. Those are fun too. I just think they're a little less easy to use. Now the idea of spotlight ink blending is just to have a really light spot and a darker spot. And the idea is that if you put your elements on the lightest spot of your card, that you will draw the eye to that light spot. So it's a spotlight because, it just highlights the element you want to bring to the attention of the recipient or whoever sees your card. It's a particularly useful tool, I think, when you have smaller elements as your focal image. So these mushrooms, they're not super big. I have a group of them, and even that is not going to fill up my card at all. So to draw the eye a little bit more towards them, I did that spotlight ink blending. Now, when I was done ink blending, I thought this card could use a little bit more magic for my Halloween vibes. So I used the stars and dots background, also from A Pocket Full of Happiness, and I cut that out of that A2 panel. This is an A7 size die, so it's really huge, and you can use it for mini slimline cards as well, or A7 cards too. To make things easier on myself, I'm just gluing a piece of copy paper on the back of this. You don't have to do that. You can glue this straight on your card, but I like to work off my card base as long as possible. I think it's easier to work off of your card base as long as possible because, one, if you make a mistake, you haven't wasted a card base, and two, it also just lies flat a lot easier if it's not a folded card base. I'm gluing those stars and dots right onto that copy paper on the back of it. So I'm just inlaying those. Again, you can do this directly on your card base. I just prefer not to. This is again really easy to do with a jewel picker tool or an embellishment wand, whatever you have. And you can see that on the bottom, I missed a dot with the copy paper. So I glued an extra piece of copy paper there and I glued in that little dot. This is a really fun background. I love that I masked off the edges for the ink blending, but then the stars continue over those masked edges. So yeah, it's just a little fun detail, but it's a great framing tool. Again, those masked edges. Once that's all put together, I can glue it on my background, and then we are going to put the mushrooms in place. Now on ink blended backgrounds, especially on watercolor cardstock, the ink stays wet for a little while. So when I glue it on my card base, I usually use a scrap piece of cardstock just to really press it in place, so I don't get my fingers all inky. Now for the placement of these mushrooms, I kept the stems off of the mushrooms for a little while before I started playing around with them, because this way I can still decide which color mushroom needs to be higher up or needs a longer stem than the other. So that's why I kept the stems separate for a little while. You don't have to do this, but again, because they differ so much in length of the stem, I thought this would just be easier while I made up my mind of how these would be placed. I still changed my mind a couple of times because that's me. But yeah, now I'm just trying to figure out how to place that one little mushroom or that little orange mushroom off the side. But I'm also thinking about which ones to adhere first, because I'm just going to glue those down and those will be more in the background. And I'm also thinking about which ones I want to prop up on some foam adhesive, because that will give me more dimension. But this little purple mushroom, I'm gluing just to the orange mushroom, and then I can just prop them all up together on some foam tape. That is also going to help me out just with the placement. The difference in dimension between these mushrooms is quite subtle, but it's always a fun little detail in your cards to have some elements propped up higher than others. For my second card doing spotlight ink blending, I am going to be using another new die set from A Pocket Full of Happiness. This is the Jack-o'-lanterns die set. It's a layering die set that creates 3 jack-o'-lantern pumpkins. Now for the colors of these, I followed Joka's guide on the website from A Pocket Full of Happiness. She had 2 layers cut out of orange, a lighter one and a darker one, and then the outermost layer, which is this one, the most detailed one, she had cut out of a really dark purple, and I just loved the way that looked. So I didn't think of these colors, it's just a great combination, and I didn't want to change it up. Because jack-o'-lanterns are lit from the inside is supposed to be lighter than the outside. That's the idea of it. You could, of course, cut this out of black, but I thought that would be, a little bit too cold and a little bit too harsh of a contrast. I think purple is a great choice there. I am doing some ink blending to make the edges of the pumpkins even darker. It's going to create sort of a dimensional look to them, but not too much. It's not too much of a dramatic ink blending. Again, I'm using the Concord and 9th inks because they just blend on so smoothly. Once that's all done, I also cut those stems of the pumpkins from a matte gold cardstock for a little bit of shine on this card, although I'm going to add a lot more shine later on. And I can just start layering these together. These are really easy to adhere together because basically all the edges line up anyway. It's just the insides that are cut a little bit differently. So they're really easy to layer up. And yeah, you just adhere those stems and then you layer the 2 other layers on top. If I were to make these pumpkins, and I probably will, I would switch up my cardstock colors a little bit. I want a little bit more contrast between that lighter and the darker orange because I feel like they look a little bit samey now. And yeah, there should be a higher contrast there. But other than that, I really like them. You could also step these up by adding some white cardstock between the layers as well, so you get even more of a dimensional difference. That always looks great as well. So yeah, that's a fun option too. Now with those put together, let's get started on our background. I'm working on Concord and 9th Sea Glass cardstock here, and I love the Concord and 9th cardstocks and inks. They're both very smooth, and yeah, I really like the color selection as well. The Sea Glass cardstock is one of my most used cardstocks, especially for Halloween. It just works really well with the Halloween color scheme. Now for my spotlight ink blending here, I want my elements for this card to be on the center of the card. So I want that spot to be the lightest, and I'm just ink blending around the edges. And I do this quite a lot, just ink blending the edges of a card. Even when I'm not going for that spotlight look necessarily, it just gives a fun look to a card if the edges are a little bit darker. Now I'm doing it very dramatically here, so I am keeping my center very light and I'm going for very dark edges. I am using Oceanside, Peacock, and Midnight ink from Concord and 9th. And again, they blend on so smoothly, especially on smooth cardstock like the Concord and 9th cardstock. I feel like I keep going on about these inks, but I just really love them. They go on like butter. To add more interest to this background, I am using the Spiderweb background die from A Pocket Full of Happiness. Again, this is an A7 size die, but I'll show you how I used it here on an A2 size card. Now, there is a little bit more to this than I thought there would be. I cut this out of 3 layers of cardstock because you know I love my dimension. You don't have to do this, but yeah, I did. The top layer is a piece of white glitter cardstock, so that's going to bring a lot of sparkle to this. And the top layer is already trimmed down to A2 size. Now to make sure it's A2 size, I die cut the spiderweb background out of a piece that was a little bit larger. And then once it was already die cut, I die cut it again with an A2 size rectangle die. That just makes sure all the edges are straight, and yeah, it's just really helpful. And to stack it up, I stacked it up, or I glued it onto a layer of white cardstock that was already die cut, but wasn't trimmed down yet. So I used the top layer as a guide to trim around it. And I did that for each layer. So I added 2 layers of white cardstock behind this, and I trimmed it down after gluing it to the first layer, and I trimmed it down again after gluing it to the second layer, because I wasn't very confident that my scissors could cut through 2 layers of cardstock. Now again, to adhere that ink blended panel down, I'm going to press it in place and press it nicely in place with a scrap piece of cardstock, just to make sure I don't get my fingers too inky, and then I can glue on that spiderweb background. Now, all spiderweb backgrounds are the same. They're a little bit fiddly to glue on because there are so many pieces you have to put glue on. But once that's done, it's really easy to just press this in place, especially because I have layered it up, because it's just a sturdier piece to work with now. If you just had 1 layer of this spiderweb background, it might be a little bit flimsy and it will flop all over the place and be a little bit harder to adhere perfectly on that A2 size card. I just want my grouping of pumpkins or jack-o'-lanterns in the center, and again I'm working with dimensional difference here, so I am gluing that largest pumpkin straight onto the spiderweb background, and I am using foam tape to adhere the other 2. I think I even used a single layer of foam tape for the pumpkin on the left, and then I'm using a double layer of foam tape on the other one. So you have one that's very much in the foreground, one in the middle, and one in the background. And again, because the edges are darker, because of that spotlight ink blending, your eye is immediately drawn to the lighter center, which is such a useful tool when you're working with smaller focal points in particular. So yeah, this is the second card in the video for the spotlight ink blending. It's a really simple design element, and I think a lot of us use it a lot without really realizing why it works. But sometimes understanding why something works because your eye is drawn to the lighter part of your card makes you use it a little bit more efficiently, so you can plan for it the next time you use a smaller focal image. So I hope that's helpful. If you like the cards, I really like these cards I made. I've been having so much fun with the Halloween cards. You guys know this. I say it almost every video because almost every video is a Halloween video these days. But if you like these cards, leave a thumbs up on this video. Let me know which card you like best out of these two. I would love to know your opinion. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of my videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.